So imagine this. A thick fog rolls across the tracks, the chill of a winter morning in Pennsylvania, and two freight trains are barreling toward each other, where a dangerous mix of circumstances will lead to one of the most devastating train collisions in Conrail's history. This is the story of the Thompsontown train collision. Early in the morning on January 14, 1988, Conrail train TV-61, or Trail Van, was getting ready to leave Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and head west for its destination of Chicago, Illinois. Three diesels led the train, with B36-7 5017 at the front, followed by two GP40-2s, which were 3394 and ex-New York Central 3054. The crew on board, who had gone on duty at 6 a.m., included 75-year-old engineer Richard Canfield, 60-year-old conductor William Robison, and 57-year-old brakeman Michael Corsi. Engineer Richard and brakeman Michael were in the leader 5017, with conductor William in the third unit 3054. All three locomotives were attached to 61 flat cars loaded with 104 piggyback trailers and containers. The train departed Harrisburg on time at 6:36 a.m. Earlier on, Conrail train UBT-506 was getting ready to leave Altoona, Pennsylvania, to head east for Baltimore, Maryland, by way of Conrail's Enola Yard, near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Two Conrail SD40s were leading, both being ex-Penn Central numbered 6265 and 6349. On board contained 72-year-old engineer Michael Herf, 63-year-old conductor Akeem Davis, and 55-year-old brakeman Steve Hanks. The crew had gone on duty at 5 a.m. Engineer Michael and conductor Akeem were in 6265, and brakeman Steve was in 6349. Both SD40s were pulling 105 open-top hoppers, all loaded with coal. The train departed Altoona at 5:45 a.m. Both trains had traveled along the double-track Allegheny Division Harrisburg to Pittsburgh main line for some time, through the thick fog and snowy weather. According to the dispatcher's observation of that stretch on the Computer-Assisted Train Dispatching System, or CATD, there was a signal circuit failure on track 2 as a result of a separation of the welded rail. Therefore, the plan was to have the westbound TV-61 be switched over to track 1 at Newport. This meant that the eastbound coal train would have to stop before CP Thompson and allow TV-61 to be switched back onto track 2 at the CP Thompson crossover. After it had cleared, the coal train would continue its journey. However, this wasn't the case. UBT-506 didn't stop and ran straight through the switch at CP Thompson at almost 40 miles an hour. Meanwhile, TV-61 was approaching CP Port on track 2 and was 3.5 miles east of the home signal. Engineer Richard reduced the speed of TV-61 to 40 miles an hour as it crossed over onto track 1. After the last car cleared the interlocking, TV-61 began to accelerate up to 52 miles an hour. As it was nearing the interlocking for CP Thompson, Engineer Richard started to slow the westbound train down again by going from throttle to dynamic braking. He then made an initial 6-pound reduction of TV-61's air brakes. Suddenly, through the fog, Engineer Richard saw the headlights of the eastbound coal train and finally threw 5017 into emergency. Both he and brakeman Michael braced for impact. At 7:54 a.m., both trains collided just east of Control Point Thompson at a combined speed of 70 miles an hour. All 5 locomotives derailed from the collision, rupturing their fuel tanks and catching on fire. 5017 was completely destroyed, with the whole front of the locomotive crushed by the impact from 6265. Both 6265 and 6349 were ripped apart and buried by all the hoppers ramming themselves into them. 3394 was found derailed but remained relatively intact. 3054 was found laying on its right side. 31 hoppers of the coal train, as well as 2 flat cars and 4 piggyback trailers of TV-61 were destroyed after piling on top of the locomotives. The engineers and brakemen of both trains were sadly killed after being fatally injured. The conductors William and Akeem were taken to UPMC Hospital in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for treatment of their injuries. The total damage to the trains was roughly $6 million, equivalent to nearly $16 million today. So how on earth did this happen? The NTSB launched an investigation to determine the crash and found shocking findings. The big factor of the crash was the failure of proper communication between the dispatcher and the train crews, which led to a misunderstanding of the switching procedure at CP Thompson. The dispatcher had planned for TV-61 to switch to track 1 at Newport, but due to the malfunction of the signal system and failing to properly monitor the situation, the eastbound coal train was allowed to continue without stopping, running through the switch at CP Thompson. According to the 1987 FRA safety assessment, it reported several deficiencies in the CATD system, including the inability of dispatchers to apply track blocks at certain locations and an unwanted exchange of train identification symbols on the CRT when the display showed 3 or more trains at the same time. That and Conrail didn't have a simulator that could be used to instruct dispatchers to use the CATD system, and there wasn't any method for train dispatchers to recognize and respond to unusual, unplanned, emergency, or stressful situations. Additionally, the weather conditions on that morning had a role in the accident. Thick fog, snow, and a reduced visibility made it difficult for the engineers of both trains to see each other until it was too late. Another major contributor that played in was the crew members of UBT-506 suffering from sleep deprivation. Due mostly to the irregular scheduling practices of the railroad, the full report released on February 14, 1989 stated, "When at home, the engineer and brakeman couldn't be certain when they would have to return to work. It was the same thing away from home. The engineers' reporting times were just as unpredictable." This was further made worse for more than 2 hours after leaving Altoona. The engineer and brakeman of UBT-506 were subjected to the steady drone of the diesel engine in full throttle of 6265, as well as the sound and motion of the locomotive rolling over the track with little variation in speed. So there was little that the engineer had to do that would help him stay alert and awake. With all these factors put together, a collision with these 2 trains was simply inevitable. Years after the crash, much has been done to increase safety for 2 trains running in opposite directions. Like a lot of software, had advanced tremendously, with more networking and GPS tracking to avoid collisions. Railroad companies are now acknowledging sleep deprivation as an issue, and some are offering employee programs on how to prevent developing problems. In the end, as stated before, B36-75017 was completely destroyed in the wreck. 3394, as well as the 2 SD40s, were damaged beyond repair and scrapped. 3054 was repaired and returned to service after extensive rebuilding efforts. The locomotive was one of the few to survive the accident and was eventually placed back into service. 37 years have passed since the incident, and while the Thompsontown collision remains one of the darkest moments in Conrail's history, lessons learned from this wreck helped to protect future generations of railroad workers and passengers alike.